Thomas Caldwell, upon reading it, suffered what his physician described as a paroxysm of rage, followed by a collapse from which he did not recover. He died 3 days later, the cause listed simply as apoplexy, a common term at the time for what we now recognize as a stroke. Following Thomas's death, control of the plantation passed to his brother, Edward Caldwell, who traveled from Charleston to assume management of the estate. It was during Edward's methodical review of the plantation's affairs that a startling discovery was made in Thomas's private study, a small wooden box containing what appeared to be marriage certificates. These documents, crudely drawn but bearing signatures, purported to record the marriage of Elizabeth Caldwell to Elijah and Catherine Caldwell to Samuel on the night of March 17, 1847. The certificates were accompanied by a letter, apparently written by Catherine, explaining that the twins had fallen in love with the two men and, knowing their father would never approve, had devised a plan to escape together. The letter described how they had been secretly planning for months, saving small items, preparing for a journey north to states where they might live, if not openly, then at least without the immediate threat of capture and separation. Most disturbing to Edward, however, was the revelation that his nieces had not been abducted, but had gone willingly, choosing to abandon their privileged positions, their family name, and their entire social world for what Catherine described as the only true happiness we have ever known. The letter concluded with a request that their father try to understand and forgive them, though they recognized the unlikelihood of either. Edward Caldwell, after consulting with legal advisors and family connections, made a decision that would shape how the incident would be remembered. He buried the evidence. The certificates and letter were returned to the box and sealed away. Publicly, he maintained the story that his nieces had been abducted, possibly murdered, by escaped slaves. The search continued, now focused on recovering bodies rather than living persons. This official narrative persisted for nearly 2 decades, until a development in 1865 changed everything. Following the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people throughout the South, a woman arrived at what remained of the Caldwell plantation, now reduced to less than half its former size and struggling to adapt to the new economic reality. The woman identified herself as Margaret Johnson, but her resemblance to the long-missing Caldwell twins was unmistakable. She requested a meeting with Edward Caldwell, who still maintained the property, though with greatly reduced circumstances. According to the household staff present that day, the meeting lasted several hours, with raised voices occasionally audible through the closed doors of the study. When Margaret Johnson departed, Edward Caldwell emerged visibly shaken. He spoke to no one about the meeting, but immediately began liquidating what remained of the estate. Within 6 months, the plantation was sold, and Edward returned to Charleston, where he lived in seclusion until his death in 1871. The true nature of the meeting remained unknown until 1958, when a collection of letters was donated to the Georgia Historical Society by Edward's granddaughter. Among these was a detailed account of the meeting, written by Edward to his wife the day after it occurred. According to Edward's letter, Margaret Johnson was indeed Catherine Caldwell, now using the surname of her husband Samuel, who had taken the name Samuel Johnson after their escape. Catherine revealed that she, Elizabeth, Elijah, and Samuel had managed to reach Philadelphia, where they lived in a community of free blacks and abolitionists who helped them establish new identities. Elizabeth and Elijah, adopting the surname Davis, had moved further north to Boston, where Elijah found work as a carpenter. Samuel, with his knowledge of horses, eventually established a small but successful livery stable, while Catherine worked as a seamstress. They had children. Catherine and Samuel had 3, Elizabeth and Elijah 2, all of whom were being raised with no knowledge of their mother's true origins. Catherine had returned south only after learning of her uncle's management of the former plantation, hoping to retrieve personal items belonging to her mother that had been left behind during their escape. More significant